So welcome everyone to today's presentation on wellbeing in communication. And I'm Dr. Nicole Bridges from Western Sydney University, and I'll be emceeing today's presentation. And today we have with us Victoria Erskine, who is a lecturer in strategic communication at CSU in the School of Information and Communication Studies. Victoria has 25 years of professional practice in media and strategic communication in PR agencies with clients in government, media, education, and the not-for-profit sectors. She spent 15 years in local government communication and also including as president of the Local Government Communications Association of Australia. She coordinated the PRIA National Student Competition Pitch This in 2020 and is a joint secretary of the PRIA Education Community Committee. Victoria's research focuses on developing resilience in communication professionals with a special interest in emerging and early career practitioners and organisational wellbeing. So welcome, Victoria.
Hi, everybody.
We also have with us Paul Cheel, who is a career communicator with over 20 years of PR experience. Last year, he founded 3CPR, a specialist corporate and financial communication consultancy, focused on delivering clients creative and measurable communication programs that cut through. He's also managing partner and CEO of Australian PR Comtech Leader, the Communication Dividend, a real-time data analytics measurement solution for communication professionals. He's host of Australia's first PR podcast, Smoke Signal, where each month he speaks to leaders, academics and influencers from across the profession. And today he'll share insights from some of these interviews on wellbeing in the PR profession, along with his first-hand experience working in agencies for the past 2 decades. So welcome both of you, and I shall throw it over to you to present.
Thanks, Nicole. Great to be here. Thanks everyone for joining us today about this, what we think is a really important discussion to have in our industry, and really thank Priya for allowing us to open this door to what it means to be a well-rounded and well-being in our public relations and communication profession. So I would like to first offer an acknowledgement to country. I'm coming to you today from the land of the Dharawal people. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any other First Nations people who are with us today. Thanks, Nicole. Here we are. So the focus of today is really came out of some discussions with the ECC group around the need to sort of keep maintaining some awareness and pressure around resilience and wellbeing in our profession. We're certainly not the first people to be discussing it. We know it's on the radar for many of us in different forms. So we're just going to go through some of the research that myself and my colleagues at Charles Sturt University have been doing, and look at the context in the profession, which Paul's going to discuss with us around his excellent work with the Smoke Signal podcast and also his own research. And then have a look in, we're going to introduce a lovely and very talented emerging professional, early career professional, Shannon to our discussion today to get a perspective from the front line about what resilience and wellbeing really looks like in practice. So thanks for joining us for this little chat. And there'll be an opportunity for questions also at the end, just to say. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and Nicole will facilitate that. This really started for me probably about 10 years ago when I started as a lecturer in communication while also working in professional practice. That's fine, Nicole, the next one's great. And we started, as I started teaching students, I noticed progressively over that 10 years, increasing levels of anxiety and certainly mental health conditions, but not even that extreme, just stress and management of stress became a challenge. So my colleague, Dr. Sharon Schoenmaker, and I started investigating what resilience looks like in professional practice. And having come from a couple of decades of professional practice myself, I already knew a little bit, I had this sense that as PR and comms professionals, we had an innate sense of our own resilience. We really were multitasking professionals, many of us working in small teams on our own, juggling many balls, of others of us working in big consultancies with really pressured clients or agencies that are very demanding workplaces, generally speaking. And so I knew that was innate in our profession, but what I started to look at was how is that actually presenting itself? So we did some research into that with professionals, and it started by looking at what the capabilities and frameworks were for professional practice. And as we know, the Public Relations Institute of Australia has that. We're all aware of those skills and capabilities. And we started to see if there was something that could match resilience as a skill in that, or is it a skill? So this is where we came to. And I was really pleased when I was reflecting back on this work, which we started in 2018, to see that this is from the latest strategic document from PRIA about the priorities for the organisation that supports us as professionals in this industry, to see that this is a topic that is definitely linked to our own, or PRIA's own, strategic priorities as we've got it listed there. So I think there's some alignment there, and we would just want to explore that a bit further now. Thanks, Nicole. So when we talk about resilience, a much oft used, thrown around word, we really wanted to investigate what that looked like. So we conducted some research with practitioners, many of whom were in a actually regionally based, which is where I've spent a lot of my time in professional practice. And we know that resilience is a skill that can be taught and developed through practice, and that it is a way that individuals have of managing complex environments and challenges and bouncing forward to actually get over or move through the challenges that you're facing in a positive way. And the other element of this story is really thinking about the role communication has in its professional, in its purpose, to actually help organizations become more resilient and create cultures of sustainable practice that really help build that purpose and create meaning, and what I like to call is using our skills for good, not evil, in thinking about creating a better place for the world. And that includes individual, organizational, and sort of community-based contexts around resilience. So that's sort of the heart of where we're coming from. Thanks, Nicole. When Sharon Maker and I did our study in 2018, it was really illuminating what we found in terms of how communication professionals expressed to us what the importance of resilience was in their professional practice. So this quote is probably one that many of us can relate to, and have had those situations where 1 minute things can be fine, the next minute it's all on fire, and you need to work really quickly to gather your emotional and professional skills to solve problems, to work with difficult people, potentially clients, senior management leaders, colleagues. You might just have multiple deadlines and not be able, have to be able to use your skills to be able to manage multiple time pressures. There's the 24/7 cycle of news and social media, all of this kind of confluing, coming to some sort of critical point where there are times when you're just juggling too many balls and things are going to fall. And how do you get through those challenges? So it was clear to us that resilience looked like a range of things in professional practice for communicators. So the people we spoke to said that it was really, for them, it felt like determination, vitality, that it was an ability to be positive and look with that positive lens through and maintain levels of energy through challenges, that it needs and requires a level of agency. So you need to have some control over the process to be resilient, or your actions within the context at least. Emotional regularity is huge in resilience research, and it's that ability, those people that you work with who can always remain calm under pressure, don't press the panic button. They're the people that are demonstrating and living those resilience skills in practice. The perseverance was really important too. It's that understanding that that things are hard right now, but if you just keep going, one foot in front of the other, then you'll get to that positive outcome on the end, whether it's a resolution or whether it's that it will pass, I guess, and things will move on. That optimism is really important, and we often know those resilient people are the most optimistic in the room, the ones that always look for the positives in a situation, problem solution makers, not problem makers, that they're ready to problem solvers rather, and able to work through difficult situations with that positive attitude and endurance. I mean, we're talking about career longevity here and sustainability of practice. So resilience is about being able to, go the distance. But what the research was telling us, or what practitioners were telling us, is that they found some of the particular challenges they had to actually maintaining resilience in professional comms practice. So juggling financial adversity, which is a very specific one also to students. So I should have prefaced that we did this research with practitioners and also with students. And similarly, the results were actually quite very similar. So mental fragility is a challenge. And that's, in this space, we often talk about and focus a lot on mental health challenges, which is absolutely real. It's obviously a major challenge we're all facing, but we're also talking about people that may not identify with a mental health condition as such, or maybe have never been in that position, but that still face challenges and need to work through how to maintain their professional standards of practice while facing difficult times. But it's all of those things in that sense. Emotional blocks are really, again, probably linked more to sort of your personal mental health and well-being, and about things that trigger certain reactions in people that can become a challenge, like dealing with difficult people, that sort of thing. Struggles with self-worth came out a lot. I would like to preface and say that a majority of our participants in the studies were female. A lot of dynamics were exposed about gender roles in our profession, and that came through a little bit in that discussion about not necessarily feeling valued in their roles within their organisations. I think that is changing and shifting, but I think that's something that's been sort of endemic a little bit in our profession from time to time. Again, that's some gender issues there, as I mentioned. The pace of the work, having to be, which I don't really have to unpack, and being responsible for picking up the slack from other people. As we know, the comms people are not always the first person briefed on a problem. They're often the last person in the chain to know about something and then tasked with fixing it. That came through in various comments from our participants. So thanks, Nicole. In summary, what our research really pointed to us and made us really critically aware of was that resilience is a skill that can be maintained through internal and external factors. And that comes to that, your own personal carriage or responsibility, and also, really importantly, the environment in which you live, work, and operate in. This is not an exercise in looking at individual responsibility entirely. We really felt that the end of this research, and as we have continued to research in the last couple of years, is that this is very much a shared responsibility between individuals, organisations they work for, and the communities in which we work, where these topics are discussed, and the lens is focused on what that means. It's developed through social interactions, and thank God we're all here because we love the idea of working in a social network. That's what communication is about. And it's the processes of communicating with others that actually helps us develop resilience. That's really, really important. So while many of us might be introverted or have introverted skills, or really operate without a need for huge networks, it's an understanding that the networks we have, small or large, are meaningful, supportive, and really help us nurture those resilient skills. And the key takeaway really for us is that resilience is a skill that needs to be nurtured and developed at all stages of our careers. And for us at this point, as an example, we have just launched a new degree in communication at Charles Sturt this year, and are embedding modules in resilience within that context. So we do a lot of work in interpersonal communication skills, as well as understanding values, and how we embed meditation practice into our classes, and a range of ways that we address the ability for students to acknowledge that this is going to be a lifelong journey that they're going to have to be prepared for, that is challenging. And we acknowledge that from the student's perspective, and try to give them the tools to help them manage that. And we're really looking forward to evaluating that in years to come, and see if that's made any impact into those professionals as we see them moving through. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Victoria. I think that's a really good grounding for this discussion today. I mean, I really like that piece of breaking down resilience. What does resilience actually mean, and what are the elements of that? I mean, I think it's a word that's used a lot, but actually being able to see there and have some research that says, okay, well, what does resilience look like in practice, I think is really valuable. And I think a good starting point for my piece of today, which I really wanted to bring an industry perspective. I've got a real passion for this topic, and it's obviously something that's become increasingly front of mind during the global pandemic of the last 2 years. So, my background is PR agencies, as Nicole said up top, and I've seen firsthand, I guess, how the impact of the workplace on mental health and wellness and well-being, both from a positive perspective when there is that supportive workplace culture and an engaged team, but also, when there are negatives and when there's burnout and the impact that can have on individuals and on teams. So I thought today I'd start with some data, and there's lots of data out there around mental health and wellness. Unfortunately, not a lot recently focused on Australian PR and comms industry specifically. So I've pulled out some data from the PRCA in the UK, and this came out just at the end of last year. So I thought this is probably the most timely, but I imagine, the data would be as relevant and, similar in Australia as well. So this looked at over 500 PR and comms professionals, in-house, agency, freelancers. And I think alarmingly, but I don't know, maybe not surprisingly, 90% of those in PR have experienced some kind of mental health issues in the past year. 2/3 said workload was a source of workplace stress. 95% see their workplace as having a key role in playing a role in this mental health and mental well-being of employees, and 3/4 actually said when they spoke up, they found a supportive workplace. So it is about encouraging those conversations to actually happen. You can flick to the next slide, Nicole. So back in 2019, I actually ran a series of podcasts on Smoke Signal around Mental Health Day, looking at mental health and wellness in PR. And as part of that series, I used this concept of 3 wishes, and it's I think a really good concept to think about. And it was coined by a UK practitioner. It was all about asking PR professionals and leaders, what are your 3 wishes when it comes to mental health and wellness? And these are still available on the podcast, and certainly worth kind of looking back on. And I actually listened back to the series recently, and I guess it was fascinating to do that in the context of the global pandemic over the last 2 years, and actually how many of these things are still so relevant, and probably so much more relevant than they were even 2 years ago. So I guess in doing that and reflecting and thinking about that, I've kind of come up with 3, I guess, discussion points from an industry perspective that I wanted to touch on today. So on the next slide, the first learning that I kind of want to share and took out from this is just that importance of the workplace. So as I just said, a majority said when they had those conversations in the workplace, they actually found a supportive environment to have those conversations, which is so important. We spend so much of our time with our peers, and so it's vital that we're able to provide that support. And I think has become even more important in this environment of working remotely and making sure people are okay. I mean, never before have I had so many conversations like that. And I think everyone's in the same boat, which is great, right? And I think a key from this is let's not go back to the old way. Let's make sure that continues. And we're asking that question, are you okay? And actually listening for the right answer, not just, yeah, I'm fine. I think in PR especially, and I think one of the reasons the numbers are so high is that we tend to be, people who are, looking to please internal stakeholders or clients. And I don't think that's a necessarily bad thing, but it's that always on culture that can lead to the challenges and those challenges to resilience that Victoria spoke about kind of arising more often. And I think there's a lot of talk about culture and culture's role in this in the workplace. But at the end of the day, and I heard this kind of comment recently, culture is not the table tennis table or the juice bar. It's, booking over lunch breaks. It's setting unrealistic deadlines. It's putting up with bad behavior. That's what defines culture. And it's those things that in practice have to be addressed. And I think right now we're all aware of that war for talent and the struggle in the comms and PR industry at the moment for talent. So to me, this mental health and wellbeing discussion is going to be critical in both retaining and attracting staff. And we've got a current account manager with an agency, Shannon, who's going to speak shortly, and I'm sure no doubt we'll kind of speak to that in more detail around the importance of that element of an agency right now. So the next point, it's not just a moral imperative, but a business benefit, right? I think there's been so much research saying that the mental health and wellness of individuals actually leads to better business outcomes. So when I say in that first point that the workplace needs to be supportive, well, actually there's a benefit not just for the individual, but for the business to do this. You know, employers who build that resilience workforce have employees who handle stress better. They have greater job satisfaction. They're happier. They're more committed to that organization. They're more engaged. You know, they're more likely to go above and beyond for their employer, and the research is out there to show those benefits. So, you know, it's, as I say, it's not just a moral piece. There is an actual bottom line benefit for businesses as well. And then the third piece is this idea of leaders need to lead. One quote that I thought was quite good on the podcast series when I listened back was, you know, leaders need to care more about culture than they do about revenue. And I think that's right. I think, you know, the world has changed. And to my previous point, if you get the culture right, the revenue will follow. So what can leaders do? So leaders need to actively listen. Leaders need to make sure that the organization has processes in place for staff to have confidential conversations. They need to share their personal journey. You know, research says that 1 in 2 people will be impacted by mental illness at some point during their working life. So that means it's either you or a loved one, a family friend, a family member, a friend, whoever it may be. And sharing these stories helps others share their stories. And most importantly, leaders need to lean into these conversations. You know, at the moment, I'm actually reading, and Victoria said she was reading it as well, the Brené Brown's latest book, and that obviously talks a lot about vulnerability. And one thing she reinforces is you're going to make mistakes. You know, you'll probably say the wrong thing at times, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're there, that you listen, and you're not necessarily going to solve the issue. And, you know, in many cases, you probably can't, but you can be there, you can be present, you can be empathetic, you can listen, you know, and who wouldn't want to do that? And who wouldn't, you know, want that if you were in that position? So there is, you know, just that piece of being there for those discussions and those difficult discussions. So on the next slide, is there a solution? And I think that's a key piece, right? Well, we talk a lot about it. Well, what are the solutions? And so kind of thinking through this and having had lots of conversations around this topic, you know, where I've landed at these 3 points. And the first is workplace design. So how can we build workplaces that are better designed to encourage resilience, really? You know, how can we manage workload? How do we manage stress levels? Flexibility is obviously key. Community and building that community and making sure that community is strong so we're able to have that support system. This idea of, you know, how do we reduce that divide between physical and mental illness? So if someone was to break their leg in the office, you know they're going to be hobbling around and not able to do what they did, but we need to reduce that gap between physical and mental illness and treat them equally. And perhaps even, you know, a wellness KPI, like what is your wellness KPI this month, this quarter, this year for you personally, and making sure and keeping people accountable to those. I know for me, it's running. I need to run each week to keep my balance. And if I don't do that, I really feel the difference. And I think everyone being able to have that part of their work life is just a benefit for everyone. The second piece is really to what Victoria spoke to, which is this idea of resilience. So all those elements of resilience, how do you build that? You know, mindfulness training, health and fitness, leadership training to have these discussions to build resilience. So, you know, there's the first one is almost the organization responsibility, and the second one is an individual responsibility. How can you do that as an individual to build your resilience? And the third one is this facilitate early support. How can we move to a preventative approach rather than having to have these conversations when things are going downhill? how can we make it more a preventative measure, whether it's, employee assistant lines, mental health first aid, I think is a really interesting concept about training mental health first aiders, flexible work. So just looking at preventative approaches to mental health and wellness. And I think, to me, this is what today's about, is opening this discussion about what is the solution, what are the ideas people have, how can we share those ideas and bring those, more holistically across the PR and comms sector. So, yeah, I mean, I think summing up, I guess COVID threw a bit of a powerful spotlight on mental health. And I heard this saying recently, which we're living through a change of era. So we're not living through an era of change, we're living through a change of era, which I thought was quite interesting. And it's really about how do we adapt to that new era. I think communicators, as Victoria spoke to, have a unique role, because we can do this for ourselves and for our own teams, but equally we can do it for the organizations that we sit in. How can we help build the resilience of the organization and make it no longer a nice to have, but a must have as well? So, that's something we can drive, a change we can drive as a profession. So that I'll hand back to Nicole, and I think we're going to hear from Shannon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. I think Victoria, you'd like to introduce Shannon?
Thank you. I would. I'd love to introduce Shannon. Shannon and I met in 2018 or a bit before that probably. Shannon was a student of mine at Charles Sturt and an outstanding student, and has transferred her attitude and positive energy into a fantastic early career start with Cefiani as an account manager there. And we know Cefiani is a leading and really successful and diverse public relations or strategic communication consultancy. And it's a very demanding and exciting world. And I'm thrilled to have Shannon share her story with you today, because the transition from university to work life, we know is a point in time where students or where professionals will make or break. And so it's really important that we are aware and having these discussions around resilience. So I'd love to invite Shannon to share a little bit about her experiences of building resilience as an early career professional. Over to you.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks for having me, everyone. I think when you reached out, Victoria, I started to think about my journey so far and how, as you say, that transition from uni to a career in a PR agency is such a milestone moment. So I left CSU in 2018 and started work at Cefiani, and I've been there ever since. I was out working in my career for a year, and then COVID hit. So talk about a real test in mental health and resilience. That definitely was a challenge, but it was a good lesson in resilience. And I think, as you said, Victoria, it's definitely something that can be learned. I hope for everybody in the future, COVID is not the reason that they learn it, but it's definitely something that you can teach yourself and you can learn from colleagues around you. So when I started thinking about resilience, I started thinking about where it applies in an agency. And I think there's probably three key areas. One is mental health, of course. Another one is having connection and belonging to those around you. And the third being practical exposure and knowledge. And I think from a COVID perspective, all three of those got completely knocked away. So I definitely had a few lessons in being able to manage my own personal resilience and mental health. And I think the people around me were a big key in that. I had the beauty of having a year's worth of relationships before the pandemic hit, and I started working in my kitchen, and I really leveraged those and those connections to make sure that I was okay in what was quite a scary time. I definitely took on some of the company's mental health policies, and I used some of my mental health days. And I think a big part of using those, that I would encourage where people is comfortable is to talk about it. I think that's one of the ways that we as an industry normalize mental health. Like if it were a broken leg, like I'm not going to be able to get up the stairs to work. If I can't come to work mentally, I probably shouldn't be there as well. And I think talking about it is probably one of the keys. I know that's not always something that people are comfortable with, and I completely understand that. But some of the cases where I definitely leveraged my mental health days were after a few big campaigns and just taking a moment to pause, reset, turn off devices and move away from that constantly churning wheel. I think that that's a good way to use them. And I think that does feed into what you were saying, Paul, about preventing before it is sort of too late. But I think it's probably something that we're going to have to look at as an industry moving forward a lot. I was reading recently that the next wave of COVID is going to be burnout and mental health related. It's not going to be case numbers. So I think that that's something that we're going to see the effects of for quite a while to come, unfortunately. But as an industry, it's one of those things we need to look at and make sure that we're supporting the people in our teams. The Sydney Morning Herald released some data earlier this week, I think it was on Monday, and it was all around the mental health impacts of COVID to 16 to 24-year-olds, which I know is quite a small group in the grand scheme of things. But when you're looking at emerging practitioners, I would say that quite a large number of that group fall into that age group. And some of the statistics were around like 42% of people experience worse mental health because of COVID, and 11% of people experience mental health issues for the first time in their lives. So they are definitely things that we need to keep an eye on. And I think in terms of what a business can do, it's really important that it's not a case of just setting one policy and then job's done. It's like culture, it needs to be tended to constantly. It needs to be looked at and refreshed. And I wrote down a couple of notes just on how we can keep it on the radar as a company. And I actually spoke to some of my colleagues as well about some of the ways that we do this. So I think enabling conversations is key, creating relationships. I know my direct manager and I have lots of conversations around mental health, and I love the idea of a mental health KPI pool. I think that's great, and I'm definitely going to take that back to the business after this one. And I think also ensuring that it's not just one person's responsibility in the agency is really important as well. It can't just be one person championing it. It's a case of making sure that everybody buys in and everybody respects everybody's decisions to either take those mental health days or to have those conversations. And also, I think a really key part for businesses is to make sure if there is a line management process, or if there is a team who are working on the mental health policy or procedures in the agency, that everybody's armed to have those conversations. They're not necessarily easy conversations to have. And if you haven't thought about it before, resources, it's good to have them on hand to make sure that you can point people in the right direction if you need to. So I think providing tools and guidance for people who are in those manager roles is key as well. And then also just truly listening to people and providing practical solutions, whether that's through the agency, for the individual, or just allowing people to figure out what they need as well is key. And I think that there's probably been a few things that have come out of COVID that will actually keep mental health on the radar, as Victoria and Paul, you both said, that are very important. I think we're seeing a trend in people are looking for that real work-life balance. Like COVID fundamentally broke down what that was. We saw kids popping up in Zoom calls, we saw animals in the background. And I think now people have this expectation that work-life balance is going to be in every role, and while we're in such a talent shortage, even more so. So I think businesses need to think about how they bring that to life. one example is we have had a whole range of our junior employees who have started with us, but because COVID disrupted all of their pracs and different things, they've had to keep doing uni while they're working. And as a business, we're enabling them to have that day or those couple of hours whenever they've got classes to take that time and continue to learn. So I think it's all about evolving how we're going to, thanks Victoria, it's all about how we're going to continue to help people to bridge that work-life balance as well.
Thanks, Shannon. That beautiful examples of exactly where we're sitting in this space, that it's something that's affecting everybody at every career stage, and that it's everyone's responsibility. And I love your practical solutions there to try and address it within your own network. And I think that throws to Paul's point about a collective responsibility in this space. And that's, so I sincerely thanks for sharing your story. I think if more organisations were cultivating those cultures that are clearly happening within Cefiani, then that's a really good thing for us. I am having to do exactly what I'm practicing, not what I'm preaching today, and have to jump out to chair another meeting. So I'm throwing to my colleagues to continue, but thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm going to leave you in Paul's and Nicole's hands to finalise the discussion. Thanks everyone for your comments, and look forward to following this up. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. I might just jump in on one of the comments in the chat there was around, and probably around this second question here, which is around personal resilience. And I think it's a good point around, you know, I wrote a note here that the comment basically says, you know, there's a definitional challenge with resilience. What does it actually mean? And I wrote a note here that it is bouncing back and being able to bounce back. And I think an important point with resilience is it's not black and white, right? It's not she's resilient and he's not resilient. It's over time, you're going to have different levels of resilience depending on what's happening to you in your personal life, in your professional life. And so there's going to be different levels of where you're at. And so, you know, this is not just it's going to affect someone else. It is probably going to affect everyone at some point. I don't know if we want to jump into the other questions as well, Nicole, but I guess we posed some questions here around, I guess, just some of those biggest challenges. And I think the third one's really about what you'd see as being valuable in protecting the well-being of professional communicators. And part of today is to say, how do we come together as a bit of a community of practice to help achieve that, right? As I said, how do we come up with some solutions to do that? So we're kind of open to ideas and comments around that as well. And I don't know if there's any other questions, Nicole, in the chat.
No, I don't see any. I think they've all been dealt with, and there's nothing I can see sitting in the Q&A.
Okay. You know, I think for me, for that third question, it's really about how do we move communications to being recognized at the highest levels, from the boards and the CEOs down. I think sometimes we're seen as the people who do stuff, and we do a lot of things, and that's only become more and more, right? We're doing more than ever in terms of internal comms and external comms and social and crisis and issues, and all these different elements of the communicator's role has evolved. But often we're seen as this execution piece. And I think we need to move to that strategic level where we're part of those, you know, the strategic business outcomes and helping achieve those outcomes. And I think, you know, if we were seen as that, we may be, you know, more recognized for the value that we're contributing, not just being seen as a cost center. So that's kind of the way I approach that, is really just elevating that role of communications and PR within a business to demonstrate the value that we are delivering.
Do you think that's improving though, Paul? I mean, I've been teaching PR in the tertiary sector for 20 years now, and I, from 20 years ago, was saying this to my students, exactly what you've just said. Do you think in the last 20 years, in the last 2 decades, there has been an improvement and a shift towards being more at that strategic level overall, or do you think we kind of was?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. In the last couple of discussions I've actually had on the podcast have been about COVID and the communications challenge around the vaccinations and COVID-19, and I'd say yes, in the last 2 years, that's where we've really moved to in terms of having a seat at the table, as they say, and being able to be part of that decision, because communication has just become so important, or became so important, right, in every level, whether that was internal or with your stakeholders, customers, whoever it may be. So I think now there is the opportunity to actually make that a reality, and I think it's incumbent on the practitioners themselves to be able to make sure you're doing that, whether you're working with clients or whether you're in a business in-house, making sure you're kind of stepping up to that challenge and stepping into those conversations. And it feels like the time is now that that is actual, we can make that a reality.
Yeah, leverage it while we can.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I do say to my students, if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it is the absolute value of good communication and strategic communication and clear and concise communication.
Yeah.
Hopefully there will be some long-term benefits to that for our industry.
But I think, to that first question there, the biggest challenges are just that, and I think, Shannon, to your point as well, in agency perspective, right, just workload, being able to do all that, being able to, as I mentioned, all those breadth of things that we now do, and being able to kind of, fit all that in somehow and make that kind of doable while being strategic.
Yeah, it is difficult in that PR and comms practitioners, we're often the workhorses, as you say, we're the ones out there doing everything, producing everything, because, we say to our students when they come to us, the great thing about doing this degree is you'll get such a huge range of skills and your skill set will be awesome. But that has its downside as well, because as we've seen, it can mean obviously workloads that are too big for us, and the fallout from that is the mental health issues. So yeah, we're sometimes too good at our jobs. We can do so much. We do so much, and we can do such a variety of skills and tasks as well. Yep.
The other thing I'd just call out is, I showed some data up on that screen and mentioned there was no local data, but there is some research being done. I see Katarina's on the line today by Curtin University in Katarina around mental health and wellness. I'll just put a note in the chat there, but it's a broader kind of PR and comms survey that they're running, and part of that looks at mental health and wellness. So I'd encourage everyone on today to check out that survey, complete that survey, and help us get some, local data that that we can then, look to action from there. So I've just put that link in the chat. And that's probably where we've, unless there's any other questions, kind of what we've got for today. And really it was around a call to action. What do PRIA members want around this area, right? In terms of individual and organizational capability, how can the PRIA help achieve that? And whether that's just having more discussions like this, whether it's coming up with some tools, what that may look like, kind of open to hearing that. We've kind of come together, Victoria and I, around the PRIA Education Community Committee, and just felt this was an area that really needs to be addressed. And I think what we don't want to see is it falls off the radar. As I mentioned, in my slides there, it's kind of really has come to the forefront in the last 2 years, which is great. We don't want to all go back to the office and that this gets forgotten. So what are some, practical ways? And I think Shannon talked to some there as well about what her agency is doing. So, how do we kind of socialize that and make that more common and not the outlier, I guess, so to speak. So, open now or reach out to Victoria or myself kind of separately and kind of, share with us any thoughts on that.
Chris has said in the chat, more publicity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you. And plus a thank you for getting the ball rolling by doing this.
Yeah, great. I think if we can get some good data from that survey around this, I think that will help it, shine a light on that. As I said, if that data from the UK is pretty shocking, 90% of experienced this in the last 12 months. I think that would shine a light if that's what we find in Australia as well. So maybe the takeout should be that we all just at least initially set ourselves a resilience KPI for the next kind of 3 months and go, okay, well, what are we going to do to make sure we're, getting, and I think this is an interesting time to do that because most of us are probably getting back to the office and, starting to find out this new normal and kind of work through that. So I think taking a bit of personal responsibility is as important as, calling on the workplace to do that as well.
Absolutely. I just wanted to thank you, Paul, and also Shannon for joining us today, and of course Victoria, who's had to leave us early. Before we do finish up, are there any other questions before we do close today? No? Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Get a little bit of an early mark, and look forward to seeing you all at next month.